we can. Each man must do his bit.
Welcome to another edition of The Public Interest. My name is David Granger, and on this series of programs, we examine issues of interest to the Guyanese public, wherever the Guyanese live, at home or in the diaspora. We want to reach them to discuss matters that they feel affect their lives. And one of the most serious issues is the question of violence. And we've dealt with violence for several weeks on this program. But today we'd like to look at a particularly savage form of violence, that is the violence caused by rape murders. And sometimes you ask yourself, is Guyana becoming a savage state? Is this the Guyana that we want our children to grow up in? And I speak of the ruthless rape and murder in April. This is a village, number 54 village on the quarantine, East Berbice quarantine region. It's difficult to explain or excuse such a vicious crime. That region, East Berbice quarantine, is the second largest in terms of population, but it has a notorious reputation for violent crimes, for murder, for rape, for robbery with violence, robbery on the arms, smuggling and piracy. Over the years, and as you know, one of our worst piracy attacks was perpetrated by people in East Berbice quarantine region. So what's going on there? Guyana as a whole recorded 6 rape murders of women. There were rapes of boys as well, but of women over the last 40 months, 3 of which occurred in East Berbice quarantine region. Evidence suggests that victims of rape murders were very frequently over the years, very old women, sometimes in the 70s or 80s, or in the worst case, 90s, and very young schoolgirls. And in many cases, the old women were living on their own in isolated areas in the villages. This has been, sometimes life in those villages, in those areas, has been marked by an absence of effective law enforcement. So the assailants knew that these areas were not well policed, and that there's a low level of human safety. Sometimes people don't look out for these old folk. And in many cases too, the assailants or the would-be assailants were familiar with the victim's vulnerability, the defenselessness. They were living alone. They're not in huge families. And they knew the everyday habits, as in the case of Miss Nandala. They knew that she would go to the back dam to pick mangoes to make achar to sell to make a living. So these crimes were not committed by strangers who came from the other side of town, the other side of country. These people lived in the communities, and they were aware, they observed the behavior and the defenselessness of the victims. The assailants seem to have little regard for the criminal justice system, and they seem to be unconcerned with the likely consequences of their crime. And they probably felt they would get away with it. Why has this type of crime, rape and rape murders, affected Guyanese society this time? The evidence that we have at our disposal, mostly from the news media, clearly show that rapes affect women of every race, of every region, of every religion, and of every rank in society. But by and large, East Berbice quarantine region has been the scene of most of the rapes and most of the rape murders. Rapes normally constitute about half of the criminal cases in Berbice, Demerara, and Essequibo magisterial districts. For example, there were about 149 cases in 2020. There are 304 cases in 2021. the 255 cases in 2022, 196 cases in 2023, and 59 cases so far in 2024. So you can see that the crime is not going away. There's a consistent pattern of cases going to the high courts. Sexual violence against women and girl children, that is to say, domestic violence, sexual violence, interpersonal and verbal violence, seems to become endemic, if not epidemic, in society. Sexual violence occurs at a relatively high rate, with about 2 out of every 5 women in the 15 to 60 age group, 60-year age group, having been sexually abused by their partners, spouses, or sometimes by strangers. About 55% of women have been exposed to violence, a rate that is higher than the world average, which is about 1 out of every 3 women cohort being treated violently, at least sexually violently. In Guyana, given the statistics from 2023, about 16 women were raped every month during last year, 2023. And it is 196 rapes. It is quite intolerable. Most rape murders since 2000 have occurred in rural communities, particularly in Region 3, the Essequibo Islands, West Demerara region, and Region 6, East Berbice Quarantine region. Those were the 2 regions which seem to have had the highest rate of rape murders. Women being raped, some of them were stripped naked and left lying in the public roads, public places, and the dam. Some being gang raped and killed. Some were aged, blind, shut-ins. Some were preteen schoolgirls, primary school girls. In one very bad case in central quarantine, a single woman was dragged from her home up the back dam, raped along the way, and then drowned in a canal. This is terrible. This is terrible. This is not normal crime of passion. This is cold-blooded savagery that our women and girl children have to put up with. What causes this? Well, maybe we need to have some psychological or some psychiatric investigation to determine why this form of extreme violence afflicts our women and children. At one level, the personal exposure of assailants to violence or to violent experiences during usually his childhood. Maybe they grew up embracing attitudes, beliefs, and conventions, and maybe cultural customs about superiority. Maybe they like to exert control over their victims. And most often, perhaps, they have very low ethical personal standards. And this is compounded by low rate of conviction in the courts. And sometimes matters are reported and they're not brought to trial because the victims, the perpetrators think they can get away with the crime, and sometimes the victims are prepared to settle out of court. As a result of that, we do not know what percentage of rapes actually result in convictions. So that is what happens at the personal level, how children, how young people are brought up. At the police level, there is a degree of insensitivity. The ineffectiveness or the incompetence of law enforcement agencies. Sometimes the indecisiveness of victims is a contributory factor, although I wouldn't put too much store by that. But naturally, people who might have been violated are reluctant to report the crime to the police. And very frequently the police are male who are not very sympathetic, or they're indifferent. Sometimes the political administration seems to be indifferent to the causes of this, to dealing with the causes of this type of crime. I would say that People's Progressive Party administrations have never seriously implemented the type of tough law enforcement measures that they need, the country needs to curb lawlessness and to prevent certain violent crimes. For example, in East Berbice quarantine, the PPP has never seriously tried to stamp out piracy, contraband trafficking in that region. Under Dr. Chetty Jagan, they did introduce something called the BASS, the Berbice Anti-Smuggling Squad. Perhaps that's the only region that ever had an anti-smuggling squad, because you never hear about that in other regions. So at least Dr. Jagan knew where the violence was coming from and where the smuggling was coming from. So what we see over the years is that official attitudes allowed other forms, and it was only a matter of time before that violent mindset seeped into interpersonal relations, sexual relations. The political factor cannot be ignored. All the PPP administrations, literally from 1961, have been tolerant. I cannot prove that they're encouraging, but they've been tolerant of violence in the region, which has always been the bedrock of PPP political support. East Berbice quarantine has always been the bedrock of PPP political support. And when we look back at 1961, after the elections of August 1961, there was a motorcade from Skeldon to Georgetown. And those of us who saw that motorcade or who read reports of that motorcade would have shaken their heads, because it showed that there was a triumphalist spirit which was very intolerant of the opposition. That was in 1961, and there were some incidents along that the route taken by that motorcade. Well, there's only one road from Skeldon to Georgetown. The first political murder in 1964 during Dr. Jagan's hurricane of protest was in the East Berbice quarantine. And I think on a previous program we played that melody about the Guyanese lament, Tain Public Road. The Tain is in East Berbice quarantine. And we know about the attempt in 1973 to seize the ballot boxes in which some young people were shot in 1973. But when you read the report of that commission of inquiry, you see the judge who presided over that inquiry clearly stated that the young people were instigated to behave in a violent manner to prevent the removal of the ballot boxes. I'm not going to go into whether the removal was justified or not, but they were told to do certain things, and as a result of that, they came upon armed soldiers and they were shot. And the guilty person, or the masterminds, the persons who masterminded that violence, should bear guilt for the person's death. And again, you saw in March 2020, particularly Friday the 6th of March 2020, in which half a dozen riots sprouted simultaneously, like clockwork, to protest the delay in announcing the results. And those results could only be announced by the Election Commission. So who were they rioting against? But all six riots resulted in some form of this. Well, riotous disorder. And the worst case was, of course, in the West Coast Berbice, but there were riots in East Kanji, there were riots in Tain, which are both in the quarantine. So you can see that from the elections of 1961, the elections of 1964, the elections of 1973, and the elections of 2020, PPP was behind violence in East Berbice quarantine. So there's no question about that. So the personal and the psychological and the political factors combined to create that attitude, a permissive attitude, which eventually led to young people's attitudes to criminal violence, particularly the matter of rape and rape murders. Could we prevent rape murders? Could we prevent rapes? Well, the question has been studied for a long time. The Guyana Human Rights Association actually produced reports about 20 years ago. One is called Without Conviction, Sexual Violence Cases in Guyana, in the Guyana Justice Process. and the other is called Justice for Rape Victims. So the GHRA has done quite a bit of spade work. And viewers and listeners to this program would be well advised to consult those reports. Uh, and the government should do the same. The government should investigate the sources and the causes of rapes, and particularly rape murders, and try to update the findings of the Guyana Human Rights Association 20 years ago. And even then, the GHRA was reporting that the rate of convictions was falling, but the rate of reports was rising. So there was always a gap between the convictions and the reports. More cases were being reported than were resulting in convictions. Then there's the question of law enforcement. Uh, this is difficult to understand because there are about three main institutions which are concerned with law enforcement at the community level. Okay, there's a national police force, yes. But within that village, within that region, within that district, within that neighborhood, we feel that more could be done to protect women and girl children. Women's safety, the safety of girl children, could be enhanced if the community policing system was more effective. What the PPP has done, they've converted community policing system into community policing groups. Now the system calls for the police divisional commander, and you will remember that the AAP and UAFC coalition made each divisional commander responsible for an administrative region. The first time this has happened. So the East Berbice quarantine is one division. So the police division commander is responsible along with the regional RDC, the Regional Democratic Council, for that region. So we don't have these huge F division and all these different divisions. We have divisions which are aligned to the administrative regions. This means that within that division, the police commander must sit down with the RDC, must sit down with the neighborhoods, must sit down with the village leaders to ensure efficient policing of the community. This means that the community itself must relate to the police to discuss areas of vulnerability. So if you have widows living up a dam, or if you have school children traveling along some dark road, to go to lessons in the evening, and they are vulnerable to being attacked, the villagers themselves would ask the police to make sure that these areas are patrolled and made safe. That is what community policing is about. It's not about driving around with SUVs with handcuffs and batons and shotguns, protecting your property. Community policing is about protecting people's lives. Protecting people's lives. And so we have a deformed type of community policing, which is not known in other countries. We have a special policing system, which is like a vigilante system. And that is what the PPP administration has converted community policing to. Then there is the neighborhood police. Can anyone say what the neighborhood police do? The neighborhood police should, in fact, operate in the neighborhoods again to visit these old widows, to go to schools, to make sure that the victims or the likely victims of vulnerable persons are given the type of protection that they need to protect them against these assailants. And then the citizen security program. These are good programs on paper, but they've been paralyzed by an ineffective policing system. What we need is a reformed police force which pays attention to proactive, positive, preventive security, human safety oriented measures within these communities. So orthodox community policing and neighborhood policing good work by promoting partnerships, by solving problems, and by improving human safety, by building trust between the community and the police. It's not about SUVs and driving around with blue polo shirts and handcuffs. It's about sitting down and working out security with the residents of those communities, and that's not happening. So we need a form of law enforcement which protects individuals, not one that just puts on blue polo shirts and cleans up Mandela Avenue. We need community-oriented policing. Now, when we look at the National Action Plan, we need to see that within each region or police division, there is a practice, and that practice should be part of a plan which can eliminate gender-based violence. Particularly, the National Action Plan is committed to protecting women and children above all else. It is not about border defense. This is a community-oriented plan to eliminate gender-based violence. That is the main focus. And this was introduced between 2015 and 2020 by the APNU AFC coalition. It needs to be built on four pillars. One, it promotes social cohesion. Unfortunately, the PPP has taken a hostile attitude to social. It doesn't mention social cohesion. It talks about corridor of unity and one Guyana. But the question is social cohesion. You cannot divide society and expect them to be united, expect them to respect one another. So social cohesion is the basis for this National Action Plan, in which we're going to eliminate gender-based violence. So there must be active promotion of social cohesion. Call it what you like, but the objective must be a cohesive society. And this is achieved by mainstreaming policies to meet the special needs of women and girls. Secondly, there must be measures to protect the rights of women and girl children. Special measures, not taken for granted. There must be special measures to prevent violence against women and girl children. And most important, that women and girl children must be involved in a participatory way, equally with men in decision making. That was the aim of our national plan under the APNU AFC coalition. The participation of women, not talking down to them, but talking with them to bring about this cohesive community security policy. The criminal justice system is what it is. It needs to be improved. It embraces investigation, apprehension, prosecution, and punishment of offenders. Yes. But although it is important to utilize the criminal justice system to curb violence, it is not enough. It is necessary, but not enough. We know very well that sexual violence cases dominate the High Court agenda significantly. There are more cases of sexual violence than any other crimes. Every month in Guyana, 13 men are charged for sexual violence offenses, and 4 are convicted every single month. Our coalition did introduce regional policing to break away from the colonial divisional system. So the magisterial districts now are more closely aligned with the police divisions. And we established 3 sexual offenses courts. Unfortunately, the magisterial system is still bound by the colonial county system, Demerara, Essequibo, and Borbies. But we still introduce 3 sexual offenses courts, Demerara, Essequibo, and Borbies. Eventually, I hope that it will be 10, so every administrative region should have such a specialized court, so that people should realize that we're serious about stamping out sexual violence, because they know there'll be a nearby court that they'll have to go into. Uh, my friends, the other question we need to pay attention to is the fact that um, criminal violence in this way has consequences. The violent rape murders the violent rapes that we see taking place, and certainly the rape murders, um, have to be stamped out. All forms of sexual violence harm mainly women. Unfortunately, as well, some sexual violence is directed against young boys, but in the main, women suffer first and they suffer most. And it must be that the ministries of the government, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Home Affairs, the Ministry of Legal Affairs, Ministry of Human Services, Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sport, they must realize that the present way of doing business, particularly with regard to sexual violence, has been ineffective. The way has to be changed. The measures have to be altered so that we can give better protection to women and children. Um, is it such a hard thing for the PPP administration to see that the violence meted out to women and children is destroying society? Is it such a hard thing to uh, focus on eradicating criminal violence, particularly against women and children, gender-based violence? Is it such a hard thing to have a plan that will eliminate rapes and rape murders? We need to aim at creating a cohesive society in which our women and girl children could enjoy a safe and good life. That is my hope for Guyana, and that is my wish to you, Guyanese women and children. Thank you, and may God bless you.